Hello, everyone. This is going to be a session to help you pick apart some of the tasks that you're asked to accomplish in the assessment, and particularly to focus on unpicking what we mean by being critical about the knowledge base of your profession. I'm recording this on the 4th of November, 2020, and it is a particularly interesting day to reflect upon the difference between evidence, what we know, and what we are willing to believe. That said, let's get into the meat of this session. I'd like to go through a PowerPoint that I've developed, and along the way signpost you to differing resources. Okay, so I think all of you are quite anxious to understand how these tasks that we're setting you each week actually relate to the assessment. And I think it's important if I just kind of read the assessment, because even in the way I read it, you'll begin to pick up clues about where we're putting on emphasis and how we're ourselves, those of us who are going to read it, are actually interpreting what we're asking you to do. So section A is 1,500 words, and it's about meaning making and authenticity. So it's really looking at you and your understandings of your profession. In this section, you will write a critical reflection focused upon the concept of knowing, and must contain a critical discussion on why this is significant to your everyday professional practice. In other words, what is it that you know in the course of being a professional in your everyday interactions? And we're going to pick apart the different ways, the different things that know can mean. This reflection must also incorporate theoretical perspectives of epistemological reasoning that we will have considered during the course of the module. And today we're going to have a look at exactly what we mean by epistemological reasoning, and hopefully again to point you towards ways you can identify when and how you are exactly doing that epistemological reasoning. It's an opportunity to get comfortable with maybe a new set of terms that, like we say, pick apart, pull apart that very simple, deceptively simple word, knowing. Okay, section A must provide an insight into the significance of context in relation to your professional practice and how you know and how you assume, and explain why this is a critical consideration at doctoral level. Any theoretical examples you use to illustrate your account must be correctly referenced using the UWS version of Harvard referencing. And I think the key word to point out there is context. One mistake that students often make is they remain too general. They try to say something about the profession as a whole, and it's very difficult to take an argument forward if you're trying to be that broad. Really use this assessment to begin to think about the specific knowledge around the specific topic you're interested in, because that will give you specific examples that you can look at and you can pull out examples of your reasoning about. So it's very important that you not try to be too broad, but that you focus in and look at the knowledge around your specific interest. Section B, which is approximately 5,000 words. In this section, you will be expected to review the professional literature relating to professionalism and the nature of professionalism. In this section, you will be expected to demonstrate a critical knowledge and understanding of the multiple perspectives that impinge the conceptualization of professionalism. And here, what we're looking for is your understanding of the key concepts that professionals use to practice in the topic area you're interested in. So again, I'm saying this to help you focus it down. It's not professionalism as a whole, but what are the concepts that professionals use in your particular interest area? And I'm going to provide you with an example of how I've done this towards the close of this session. So you're demonstrating critical knowledge about the main arguments posed between different perspectives within the literature, and you're providing an analysis and reflection on those multiple perspectives. And I think almost any of the concepts that we're using that are important, and it's key how you interpret them, what we want you to be doing is looking into the literature enough so that you understand the different perspectives that are being taken on these concepts. There's no one size fits all definition of concepts that you're using. What you find is that there will be people who have different definitions of those concepts. And they have those different definitions because they're emphasizing, they have a perspective that emphasizes one thing more than another. And part of what your task is to look at those competing, if you like, definitions and reflect and analyze so that you're arguing for your own conception that synthesizes, analyzes, and synthesizes the different perspectives you're going to find around the concepts that are most crucial to your topic area. Okay, if you have questions, we're going to have a session next week just for questions and answers. So as you go through this, you might want to be jotting down thoughts that you have and questions that you might want to ask. We're more than happy to go over this again. I think it is a step up. It's a big conceptual step to take, and we would like to support you as you do that. So the guidance for how to tackle the assessment, broadly, I would make three suggestions. Use your weekly task to explore a section of what you want to explore in your assessment piece. So when you get the task, look at how you're developing your assessment and say, how can I use this to look at a particular focus that I want to explore in the assessment, so that you're not doing two separate tasks, but what you do in the weekly task is then something you can paste into your outline and develop further in your assessment. That's how it's been designed, so that each week you're doing something that then can contribute to your overall project. And if you're saying to yourself, well, I don't know how that task is going to fit what I want to say, go about doing that task in a different way. How can you make it fit? And so don't try to write something that looks like what other people are posting, or write something that seems kind of general enough to be applicable. Take these tasks and make them work for you. So whatever your research interest area is, interpret the tasks in light of what you want to explore there. My second recommendation harkens back to something that was in the folder for our synchronous day, but we didn't actually have time to focus on very much. So I just want to take you to that area in the Moodle. So there's a section that is on the first synchronous weekend. So that's the tab that we're in. And if you scroll down within that tab, you come to materials for first weekend. And if you look in that folder, if you click on that folder, you can see there's lots of resources there. And one, which I'm just going to open now so you can briefly look at it, is a way of helping you think about your profession visually. So you work between policy land, where policy is made, service land, where professionals practice, and research land, where theory and evaluation are being carried out. And you have the opportunity to play around, be a little playful. What do these lands look like? What's the transportation between them? Are some islands richer or poorer or more varied? It's just a way to do some mind mapping, but also to kind of draw some things that maybe exemplify for you some of the issues involved in the terrain you'll be exploring. And as you look through the rest of them, each of them invites you to look at your profession and your possible research topic, and either planning it out or understanding the relations that are something you're going to need to explore and take account of. And from doing this kind of drawing and mapping, you can then turn that into an outline for how you work through the assessment. Going back, the last thing that I would just give you some guidance on is use the readings to provide more detailed questions to pose for your particular context and issue. And I'll give you an example of where you can use some of the readings to focus in and ask particular questions that address in detail and depth and with richness the general questions that the assessment sets you. Okay. I wanted to start to do that by just pointing to a couple of passages in some of the readings that might give you a jumping off point or a way to start writing. May challenge you in a way that can help you start to do some writing. In Eisner's piece, he's really, it's a very interesting piece written in 2002 because it kind of stands at the pivot point between what was a very positivist conception of knowledge and theorizing that's applicable to professions, and a much more social constructed or critical materialist theoretical approach. There's really been a kind of evolution, and many different schools of thought have contributed to it. But I think many of us still kind of rely on facts as if they were, and certainties. And you might even have the belief that one of the things that you're doing here would be to increase your certainty about evidence that pertains to your profession. However, Eisner's asking us to ask some interesting questions about that. What have been the practical and conceptual consequences of the belief that knowledge was not the same as belief? That knowledge reveals regularities, not uniqueness. That knowledge was universal, not local. That knowledge was separable from values, and that knowledge depended on language for its very existence. So this kind of knowledge is based on kind of, like he's arguing, the natural sciences, on trying to emulate physics and chemistry, what's sometimes called the hard sciences, that you can extract a formula, and that formula, that law of nature, applies universally. And within human sciences, there was an era where we thought all we have to do is get the formula and then apply it correctly. But decades of attempts to do that have shown that actually one size does not fit all. And we've spent a lot of money doing things in this kind of broad brush, universal way that haven't proved effective, which has meant we've had to say, well, maybe that's not possible. And Eisner's arguing that there is a lot of tacit knowledge of each context that is also needed, which means that you can't just, like a cookie cutter, apply a formula to how to treat people or interact with people or work with people. It's just simply not that simple. So it's important to think about what are the assumptions we're making about knowledge, and do we have to let go of some of those? What's the consequence of having these different stances on knowledge? And do we come with some assumptions that maybe we need to re-examine? And I think what Eisner's asked us to do is to shift from expecting to find these universal truths, these formulas that are applicable everywhere, to a much more nuanced and, if you like, humble position about what our epistemological claims can be. And that leads to the question, which of our positions are rationally warranted, reasonable, or defensible? That is, well-founded rather than groundless opinions. And in your specific topic area, that's a question worth asking. of the things that you assume are true about your topic, what's the reasoning behind that? And are there arguments that are better founded and less better founded? And what's the criteria you're using to decide that? Okay. Moving on to Errett, which is what you've been reading this week. He is taking forward kind of the argument that Eisner starts us thinking about. And he's claiming that what he's interested in is the tacit knowledge and the knowledge or the learning that takes place while professionals are working. And I think, as he states, this kind of learning, though crucial for professionals, is often remains unarticulated and unspecified. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that is one of the challenges of a professional doctorate, is as well as looking at what theory and the robustness of that argumentation for that theory. There's a different kind of knowledge, and that is knowledge gained from the ground, gained from how you're working. And you as well have to apply that critical lens to the experiential knowledge. And I'm just going to turn to that particular article if I can, because I think if you get down into the depths of it, he identifies working processes, things that professionals do in the regular course of their activities when their goal isn't to learn, but their goal is to work. Nevertheless, those processes actually account for crucial and critical amounts of learning, even though it's a byproduct. And just it's interesting to take a look at that list: participation in group processes, working alongside others, consultation, tackling challenging tasks and roles, problem solving, trying things out, consolidating, extending, and refining skills, and working with clients. So if we take just that list, and you, with the topic or the issue that you're interested in, take a moment and ask yourself, when are there times that you learn something because of your participation in a group process or working alongside others? When did you learn something through tackling challenges, tasks, and roles, or doing problem solving? When did you learn something by trying something new, trying a solution? And it's really important to reflect on a series of activities that have led up to you consolidating, extending, and refining your skills. And working with clients is actually something I'm going to focus on in the example that I gave you. But like I was saying, you can use the readings to kind of block out sections of your assessment. And you could use this list as subheadings and talk a little bit about what you've learned through some of those processes. Maybe not each one in the list, but if you work through that list and you find somewhere you think, yes, here key learning has happened in these activities relevant to your topic, then you may want to use those and describe how that learning happened and how you would, at this point, with the reading and the conversations you have, assess that knowledge now as it's relevant to your topic. And if you just scroll down, this next section takes you through the kinds of learning and gives some examples that you might want to read as you think about what would your own example be. Okay. So I think it's important as we're beginning to talk about different kinds of knowledge and what you know about your profession. You know that in relation, like the graphic workbook I was suggesting you could use at the juncture or the intersection of different spheres. And I call them the theoretical sphere, the policy sphere and the evidence sphere. And it's similar to what Shaxson is how he describes how evidence builds. If you look at scoping the issue, asking the question, deciding what sort of evidence is needed, that sphere is often about drawing on theory to define what the problem is. Procuring, managing, carrying out research to provide new evidence. That kind of can relate to policy. So if you're deciding on a strategy of how to tackle a problem, that's basically what policy is. It's a plan of action or a plan of investigation. And when you move from policy to evidence is when you interpret and apply that plan, is when you begin to find out, does it work in practice? So as you're thinking about your topic, think about what's the theoretical base that you have. What do you know about the plan of actions, the policies, and how they relate to theory? Are they theory driven, or are they flavor of the month driven? And there's often some professionals can begin to be skeptical of why we choose the policy we did. How much of is that driven by evidence or even theory? But nevertheless, the knowledge that you have is going to draw on these three spheres and how they relate to each other. And as you develop your topic, you're going to understand the relations between those three. And if you like, the history of that relationship in more detail. And talking about the evolution of policy is often about talking about that playoff between theory and policy and evidence. And there's often an interesting story. And again, I'll try to give you an example of that just a little bit later. Now I want to turn to looking at criticality in more focus, because this is a very important part, particularly of the second part of the assessment. So criticality, as Barnett conceptualizes it, exists in three domains. You can be critical of the formal knowledge, you can be critical of yourself or the self, and you can be critical of the context in which the self finds itself, critical of the world. It is important in higher education to focus on the relationships of all these domains. And it is really, criticality is sort of the springboard or the touchstone. It's only when we're critical sometimes that we define the area that problematize the area that then we can generate solutions from. So in some ways, it's the springboard for creativity. Brian also argues that there are, went ahead. Critical capacities. What does it take to be critical? A well-developed, robust, confident, and self-aware professional, able to challenge and reconstruct existing understandings and modes of operation. And this is a point where you might want to ask, how do you develop to get to the stance where you can be critical and reconstruct existing understanding and modes of operation? It requires an awareness of values, priorities, and power structures implicit in a context, and a capacity to be constructively critical of them. So that may be a question that you want to ask about your specific topic. What are their priorities and the power structures, and how did they come to be that way? Where is your position in relation to them? Are you a proponent, an advocate, or a critic? And it's okay to be an advocate, but understand why you are an advocate. And it's okay to be critical. It's okay to be ambivalent, but it's important to be able to articulate why you stand where you do. And lastly, criticality requires an appropriate values such as respect for reasons and an inquiring attitude, open-mindedness, independent-mindedness. If we draw on Foucault's trident as a model for how to be critical, it starts in this right-hand bottom corner with posing the problem. Why is there a problem? And theorizing, exploring, developing possible solutions. So that's the purpose of why we are critical. If you're posing those problems, it often leads to being skeptical about the components of the status quo, the value of stated aims, the effectiveness of chosen means, the accuracy and veracity of claims, the declared motivation, interest, and purpose of relevant persons and organizations, the value and coherence of chosen beliefs, concepts, the nature and status of knowledge, and we're getting down here to the really deep fundamental questions, the nature of reality itself. You can, any policy document or that is relevant to your topic, you can analyze it by asking those sets of questions. What is the value within the stated aims and objectives and goals? How effective are the chosen means? And what's the accuracy and veracity of the claims? And then moving towards deeper questions. We're going to talk about a hierarchy of criticality, moving from instrumental to transformative. So as you ask those questions, they generate critique, which challenges assumptions and questions many of the assumptions that underpin the status quo. And as you do that critical questioning, you will find that you see the problem differently and you would pose the problem differently. So there's a kind of cyclical, as you can see the arrows, a cyclical dynamic to understanding critique as this kind of process. And you might want to take that out and use it, put it up on in your study space. And as you read anything, subject it to this kind of cycle of critique. And again, you can use that as subheadings of if you're looking at a particular policy, you're looking at a particular research or advocated method. As you do that, you can use these questions to help you do it and use it as a kind of analytic frame. So I just said that the literature on criticality, some of it conceptualizes criticality as having different levels and of being of different types, and that there's kind of a hierarchy to them. So one way of looking at these different levels is to look at them as starting with instrumental criticality. So you're not, what you're looking at is how well things are done. And transformatory criticality asks much more fundamental questions. It doesn't just say, are we doing this in the right way, but should we be doing this at all? And the argument goes that perhaps instrumental criticality grows as you mature as a professional and as you have moments to be reflexive and to try ways of adapting practice. And this can then lead towards an even broader, wider view of the profession, which enables you to think, are there even different ways of doing this than not just perfecting the way we're doing it, but thinking about what we do in a completely different way. And often this transformatory criticality requires engagement with theory and re-theorizing what you think you know. So as I've talked about that hierarchy of criticality, what I'm suggesting that there is a developmental path. Now, while this might be the case, I think for many professionals, it doesn't necessarily pan out that way. In fact, Some people who've been in a profession become more instrumental the longer they're in that profession. They kind of lose the capacity to look up and out and around and ask, can we be doing this any other way? They can become entrenched and very wedded to a particular way of doing things. And all they're interested in is ways to do that more efficiently rather than asking, should we be doing something else? But that's a point for you to maybe consider. What has your professional journey, which way has your professional journey led you? Has it led you to expand the range of things you can think at? Or has it been an uneven journey where there have been times where you've been so pressurized that you've just got to think about doing things as efficiently as possible, and the only kind of criticality you have is instrumental? And have there been opportunities and maybe transitions between positions which have meant giving you that opportunity to look around and ask some bigger and wider questions? And it's always very valuable to take a moment and assess your professional journey, and if it has helped you be more or less critical, what kind of criticality each step along that journey has afforded or enabled. So this next slide talks a little bit more about what transformative criticality is, and it's kind of a call to action. It may be worth asking, is this, would this be a description of you? And is this something that you aspire to be able to do, to have the motivation and ability to persuade, engage, and act on the world in a mindful, analytical, evaluative way, so that your analysis in a real way is providing leadership for thinking with others. And within that, it's important to think about it not as a lone individual activity, but to reflect on how that's mediated by the social and physical environment. If we think about knowledge not as something as individuals contain in themselves, but knowledge as an inherently social construct, what it is we're able to know is not only dependent on how we can ask the questions and how we can use language, but about that interaction of shared language, shared conversation, and what that throws up. And as kind of has been at the baseline of a lot of what I've been talking about, underneath that, which is something Eisner was referring to, is this underpinning of moral vision and values. And one of the reasons that professional knowledge does not remain abstract, because it's always about taking moral, responsible action with other people. And moral knowledge, it always has to take into account the context and the particular people and the circumstances in which it's being applied. So now I think I maybe skipped this slide. Yes, I did. Yes, I just skipped a few slides there. So I thought it would be useful, and you might want to just tap the pause button here. I've been encouraging to you at several points to ask questions, but now in particular is a good point to stop and think, what resources, from what sources do you need to engage critically with your professional topic? What qualities do you bring and want to work on sharpening? And what implications will this have for yourself, career, and sector, particularly with relevance to the change you'd like to see, the change you'd like to research and understand better through your research project? And when you're ready, come back and we'll look a little bit deeper at some of this critical knowledge, and I'll give you an example from my own work. Okay, moving on, there are, as I promised, I was going to talk about how you can unpack knowledge and talk about different kinds of knowledge. And what I had said earlier, there's different spheres where you can look to see what kind of knowledge comes from theory, from policy, and from practice. But you can also look at knowledge as different kinds of knowing. One is substantive knowledge, and that's knowing that. Another kind of knowledge is procedural knowledge, knowing how. Moral knowledge concerns knowing why. Knowing why is kind of an overarching knowledge that we need to use to think about both what we know and how we know it. Ontological knowledge is quite interesting because it is part of this academic learning, knowing how it is to be. It looks at claims of reality. What is it to be in this situation? And it's particularly interesting. I think some of you will find that more interesting and some of you not so much, depending on your topic and your discipline background. That's particularly questions of ontology are particularly important within the social sciences. And expressive knowledge, knowing how to communicate about all of the above. So ontological knowledge, which may be a new term for you. Knowledge of what it is to be relates to personal and professional experience. Ontos is a Greek word. It simply means being. It can be achieved through memory or imagination, that is, through some process of immersion. It concerns the capacity to conceive of more than one way of categorizing reality, like the ability to understand what it is to be an artist, a revolutionary, to know what it is to be pure, to wield authority, to be a child, a prisoner. So it is very much focused on what is the experience, and it's related to hermeneutics and existentialism, particular schools of social theory. But it is worth anyone who is a professional to stop and think what it is to be in the shoes of someone who you're interacting with, who your goals and ambitions hinge upon their participation. Taking a moment to think, what is it like to be in their standpoint, as well as to take a moment to consider on a deeper level, what is particular and unique and important about what it is to be in your position. And why ontology is important is because without some ability to get into the skin of others, the human condition, history, what characterizes one period or culture as against another, none of these things, without some ability to get under the skin of others, can be understood. So food for thought there. And again, all in reference to what might you want to explore about the lived experience of some of the people integral to the issue that you want to explore. It is the knowledge of actors as against that of the audience, of the inside story, as opposed to that obtained by some outside vantage point. It's another way of talking about ontology. And coming to better understand your own ontological perspective. And then I wanted to say a little bit to open up what expressive knowledge is, to help you think about what is your expressive knowledge and how is that developing as you undergo working on your research project. And that's one of the fundamental things that happens is you read and you reflect and then write. Your language, how you experience language and how you use it changes. But it's also important to be aware that in a way you're beginning to learn not a different language. Bakhtin's Mikhail Bakhtin is very interesting to look at in respect to this. He talked about the fact that there are speech communities. And each speech community has its own particular way of talking and of using the terms that are common in that speech community. And sometimes we refer to this as jargon. And often someone experiences language as jargon when they're outside the speech community and they feel like people are talking about something and it's very clear they understand what they're talking about, but the person outside that speech community is at a loss. So one of the things that happens as you become an academic is you become one of these insiders in this speech community. And you cannot fully participate in an ongoing dialogue without becoming familiar with these terms and becoming part of this speech community. And while that might seem intimidating and imposing, it's also a gift. So I think this quote is worth sharing. It is a grave error to regard the learning of language as a purely instrumental matter, something you have to do to gain entrance to the club, as a toll in the service of the purposes, standards, feelings, and beliefs. Foreign languages distill a view of the world which is constituted by them. In learning a language, and even an academic language, an individual is initiated into a public inheritance, which his parents and teachers and inviting him, his parents and teachers are inviting him to share. So in a way that if we look at that question of how you know what you know, or what are what's the criteria for the rationale you use to know what you know. We're often building on what people have said in the past, and theories develop through several people who have some insights, and then further people draw on those insights, refine them, test them, reform them, and that creates these concepts and these particular ways of using language. And a key part of what you were trying to do when you're really trying to understand these concepts in depth is to understand that chain of inspiring, of insight, refinement, and reforming the language that is used. Okay, so talk a little bit about the different kinds of knowledge that you might want to consider, and particularly try to give some insight into what ontological knowledge is, because it might be a foreign term, but it's a very crucial thing to understand as you try to gain more depth about your subject area. And with that, thinking about as you gain this deeper awareness, how do you gain the capacity to talk about that in more depth, which is the expressive knowledge. So I want to, for a minute, turn to a concept that has been important in some of the research that I've done. As I was just saying, these concepts don't come out of thin air. It's not just that you go to a dictionary and you take whatever definition you find there. That's usually a very diluted, general, all-purpose definition, which probably doesn't really speak to your professional circumstances. It's much more important to find out how the people that have developed your profession define those terms and why they have come to use those words and what significance they have. So the term resilience has particular significance, and it's a contested term. There are differing perspectives on it. What's the work that it does? Why is it important for someone who is doing work across social services and education? Understand what resilience means. Does it mean just any old thing, or is it doing particular work in a policy context? So I would say resilience and the importance of it to the profession goes back to person-centered psychology and the work Carl Rogers did there, and his primary presumption, which was a real step change. Up until then, many public services were concerned with categorizing and containing those that were considered to be deformed or degenerate, and the social problems often positioned people as problems rather than people as problem solvers. And his key insight was to presuppose something completely differently, that every person has an innate capacity to grow, and whatever they're doing, they're seeking somehow to find the best solution for themselves, which really turns on its head, if you like, previous conceptions of people that were engaging with services. The Humans Givens works of Joe Griffin and Ivan Terrell, which is very interesting to look at, developed that basic person-centered psychology, and did so by looking at which interventions seemed to make any difference and which interventions didn't. And this only extended this basic premise that with the right resources, people provide their own solutions or become very active agents in their development and their growth and reaching their potential. And so this work gave rise to an increase. You can see, so those theories encouraged a different kind of policymaking and research that tried to test out this theory to a much greater degree. And so we saw through the 90s and into the 2000s, strength-based interventions. Miller and Rose 2009 looks at just precisely how effective strength-based interventions were, and what they identified as being most crucial to them was the agency of the person. What was most crucial is that anyone working with someone who was coming to services waited until the person themselves was ready to make a change and themselves defined the change. And the evidence base shows that the capacity to do that is often crucial to the success of interventions or not. And again, moving from a very traditional conception of the professional as the expert and the client as a passive recipient of services, this is again working to turn that significantly, so that what the position of the professional is not to know the answers, but to have the capacity to draw out of the person themselves the strengths and the curiosity and the agency to make changes that work for them in their particular context, rather than telling the person, prescribing for the person exactly what they needed to do. It's a key step change, and it underpins a lot of Scottish policy from Gerfeck onwards. At about that time, as more and more evidence was becoming available about this completely different conception of what the working relationship with and how you set goals and how you work towards them with people, whether that is in the area of family literacy, drug addiction, recovery from mental health problems. It was really changing how services conceptualized what it was that they were meant to be doing. Or this was offered, and it was offered whilst alongside it, the ingrained in habituated way of providing services still had a lot of inertia, and still to this day turns out people who aren't really engaging with that school of thought at all. But nevertheless, in 2011, and based on concern really that we couldn't afford to do all the work, we couldn't afford to be the professionals that had all the answers and positioned people who engage with services as passive clients that we did everything for. The Christie Commission report was coming at a point where a crisis, just we couldn't afford to fund that kind of service anymore. And one of the things the Christie Commission did is it really sought the perspectives, the ontological, if you like, perspective of those who had experience of services. And they were key to the findings that the Christie Commission report put forward. And the Christie Commission report, the findings do say that services have to work differently. They have to work better at working together with each other, and better at working with the people that they're meant to serve. Because it's what they were finding, which again is based on these prior, if you like, building blocks, is that working with people is much more successful than working on people. So what does this have to do with resilience? Well, it changes what the outcome is that you're looking at and what kind of dialogue you might have with a person. So if it's them regaining their strength to make choices, that's very different than if you're looking at them as a passive patient that you fix. Who does the fixing and what it means to continue to be an agent that negotiates a world where there are risks in a way that means they're able to cope with them is a very different way of constructing what it is that services do. But as I said at the beginning, resilience, there are different perspectives on it. And there are many social theorists who are quite critical, or if you like, skeptical, and argue that resilience is just a way of withdrawing support and making people responsible for bearing with conditions that are unacceptable and that they shouldn't have to tolerate. There's a very strong critique of the withdrawal of the welfare state that is quite wary of this term resilience if it means that we're asking people to do more with less. And because we've been living in this era of austerity, it's you will know that a lot of policy is asking professionals to be resilient, i.e., do more with less, as well as asking whether it's students or people who use services to do more with less. So there is a real tension. Some advocacy groups would say this gives them an opportunity to exercise rights, to have more of a voice, to have more agency, and they welcome room to if you like, set their own agenda. And it's whether one argument is more correct, accurate, or the other is often how policies that are meant to support resilience are in fact implemented, and the resources. So there's can be lots of policy that advocates and has different aspirations, but one of the ways to be critical of it is to look at what are the resources attached to it and how are those resources meant to be chosen, distributed, and used. Okay, so that's giving you a background and an example of how the term resilience has developed, why it became used, and also how it's critiqued. And what I wanted to do was, so in a piece of work that I did, which was about the Adult Support and Protection Act, we were aware that in enacting and implementing this policy, social workers were assessing how resilient a person was and whether they would intervene, whether they would use the Adult Support and Protection Act to intervene in an adult's life would largely be based upon how resilient they deemed that adult to be. And people who were the focus of this this policy, in large part, when we consulted with them, were unaware that this term was being used to assess them. So an important part of finding out how they would like social workers to work with them was to understand what their own definitions of resilience might be. What are the connotations, the associations, the images that meant this would be a term that not only was used about them, but could be a term that they themselves began to explore and decide how it was used. And that's very important to consider. And I would ask you to consider it. Whatever key concept that might be part of driving policy change or policy implementation, to take a moment or make an ongoing task as part of how you research what you do, to investigate how is that term understood, if at all, by the people that it applies to, and what is their response to that? How are they working with that? What does it mean to them? Because it is in these different competing meanings that come together, that deeper understanding and a possible better way that services work together actually happens. So I think it's kind of important to take a moment and look at how that term resilience was actually picked apart and made understandable by the people to whom it's applied. Once they understood it, the people that we consulted had some advice for social workers. And when we came to write up that piece of work, this is as what we considered key points for social workers to consider when they're assessing someone's resilience. That what they might want to have a conversation with the person about is how to lessen fears and increase strengths. That knowing that a person wants to have the ability to reinvent themselves after difficulty or harm has occurred, that they want to be connected to the wider world and the bigger picture, and being able to see others' points of view and work with them, being able to contribute or give back to others using one's strengths and experiences. So if a social worker wanted to work with someone to build their resilience, this is what the people that we consulted in this research wanted it to mean. So from talking about Carl Rogers and the Humans-Givens theory, looking at the work that Miller and Rose did, this has been an example of how we've taken a concept or a repositioning of who services are for and how it's meant for us to work, an actual application of engaging with people to understand what that might mean in their terms and what that actually means in practice. So I hope it's been illustrative, and that you might be able to think of a key concept and examine who understands it, what they mean by it, how they use it, and crucially, who they apply it to, and how much those it's applied to actually are part of the conversation to determine all of how professionals use that term. I would just like to say, if we look back to Rogers' Human-Givens theory, strength-based, that is work that happened over decades. And this isn't anything we're expecting you to have completely got your head around in the next 6, 7, 8 weeks. The overall construction of a knowledge base is a slow process of building links between data, theory, and personal understanding. You're going to make some progress in that within your own research project, but also the whole point of research is to become sensitized to that larger development and to be able to see where you are in terms of what terms we're now letting go of and no longer using, and what terms we're beginning to use differently, and what new terms we're using because they are more fit for purpose. If I can go back to my timeline before I close, and I appreciate you've been listening for a long time. Can I get to it? A very interesting book, which I think has applications across almost all the work that people that we're doing, is this book, Principles for Building Resilience, Sustaining Ecosystem Services. Oops, oh dearie me, something's gone wrong. It's the reference is for Principles for Building Resilience, Sustaining Ecosystem Services in Social and Economic Systems. And it's here, I've got it better here. It's a very interesting book that integrates a lot of new thinking about social services as ecosystems, and this whole idea of systems thinking, which is slowly, I think that, it was first raised as maybe a better metaphor. Ecosystems was a better metaphor, and systems thinking was a better model than many of the prior models we've been using to think about social systems or social sciences. That systems thinking is a better way to think about society and professions and institutions and organizations. It brings in a different kind of language and a different model of what it is we're about. I think this is a key publication that puts that language to work in a number of different settings, and I can recommend it to you. And just to say that language is constantly evolving, the concepts that we use are constantly evolving, and often we can articulate best has been known and used for a long time, but that may not be what is actually the most fit for purpose and useful in the dynamics and the challenges that we're facing now. And I think that brings us back to this essential difference between knowledge, codified knowledge that you find in books, the theoretical and abstract knowledge, which is available to you in libraries, and the knowledge that you've gained from and you have within your practice. There's an interplay between them, which means that as we think about, can we apply these theories? Do they really work in practice? The answer becomes in part, but we could do better. And if we really look at experience, then we change the theory that we're trying, and we create better theory. So theory isn't something that you just learn, memorize, and apply. There's always this interplay, and that's a key part of what you will be doing in your research study, and it's something that you can begin to think about in this assessment. Over the course of this hour, I've tried to break down the different ways we can know how criticality is an important part of examining knowing, and try to give you an example of how the knowledge within the concept resilience is something that was tested in practice in some research that I myself did. Okay, thank you for listening in. I hope you found this useful. And like I say, this is going to be up for a little while. Please engage with it in bits, stop it, do some writing, do some thinking, explore some of the resources, and then have a go at listening to more of it. We'll be online next week to answer your questions. And that is